One question I get a lot is, I have an idea, how do I find co-founders to start this company with? And I usually say two things. The first is, I say, are you sure you need a co-founder? Because not everybody needs a co-founder. Jeff Bezos started Amazon by himself. Now, having said that, it is still often good to have a co-founder. Why? First, the startup is a tough, challenging journey. And many times, you want somebody who is in it with you, somebody you can rely on, somebody who is experiencing the setbacks with you, not as an employee, but as somebody who's been in it from the start as a co-founder. Second of all, because you may not have all the skills it takes to get going. Okay, so how do you find those co-founders? Sometimes people go, well, I'm going to systematically go look for them. That is unlikely to work. Why? Because you don't have enough time to go meet people that you can really rely on in depth in all the challenges that you will encounter. It is much better to go with people you've already spent considerable time with and ideally been through difficult situations. Those could be people you went to school with. Those could be people you know from childhood. Those could be people you worked with at another company. They don't even have to have been at the same company. It could be somebody you did a partnership with. Whatever it is, though, ideally it's somebody you have experience with, not just when everything is going great, but also when some problem came up. The co-founder relationship will go on often for many years, and you will encounter many difficult situations. You do not want to find out that somebody is really terrible and runs away at the first problem or turns angry, starts yelling at you or yelling at employees when things go wrong. Even if you think you already know somebody, you should still spend considerable time with them in the run-up before formalizing the co-founder relationship. That is, you should make sure your view of why you're starting this, what you want to accomplish, where you want to get to in the next year, that those views about very fundamental things are aligned. What should you look for in co-founders? Ideally, co-founders complement each other. So if you are an engineer, you might want to have a co-founder who has some business knowledge, and vice versa. If you're an introvert, you might want to look for somebody who's an extrovert. If you have a very strong product vision, you might want to pair up with somebody who can be great at recruiting, team building, selling. Ideally, co-founders really complement each other so that the sum is greater than the pieces. How many co-founders should you have? I generally find that 2 or 3 co-founders works best. Sometimes teams come and they have 5 or more co-founders without anybody clearly being in charge. And that can be very, very difficult because one of the things that startups need to do is they need to make a lot of decisions very quickly. And if you have too many co-founders, coming to consensus can be very difficult. A great example of co-founders who complement each other and who knew each other very well was the MongoDB founding team. It consisted of Kevin Ryan, Dwight Merriman, and Elliot Horowitz. Kevin and Dwight had worked closely together at DoubleClick. Dwight was a co-founder of DoubleClick. Kevin had come in as president, later became CEO. Elliot was then an employee and an engineer at DoubleClick. So the 3 of them had worked together. In fact, Elliot had previously helped co-found a company called ShopWiki, again with Kevin and Dwight. So they had worked together in 2 contexts before they came together to start MongoDB. There wasn't any uncertainty about how they would behave with each other in difficult situations. And they also complemented each other incredibly well. You now have your co-founders, you're ready to formalize things. One very important thing to do right from the get-go is to vest founders' equity. What does this mean? It means when you form the company entity and you give shares to yourself and the other co-founders, those shares aren't immediately yours. You have to earn them over time. The reason this is important is because stuff goes wrong and co-founders leave. This happens all the time for a variety of reasons. And you don't want somebody walking away from the effort and retaining all their equity in it. You're going to need that equity to hire people who will take over whatever that co-founder was doing. Many times, founder vesting is seen as something that investors require, and it's seen as something that investors want to get rid of founders and have that equity for investors. But that's not at all what's going on. I've been through many situations, almost every company that has multiple co-founders. Eventually, somebody wants to leave or is basically asked to leave because they are not getting the job done. And in those situations, it is essential from a fairness perspective that they don't wind up with as big a chunk of the company as those people who are going to continue building the company going forward. And I've seen all sorts of crazy things, including a founder who went on an India journey and wound up staying in an ashram, never coming back. Another question that comes up a lot is, how should equity be divided up among co-founders? And while there is no rule that you absolutely have to follow, there are two considerations that matter a lot. One is, what is the relative experience and likely contribution of the co-founders? So if you have one co-founder, for instance, who has had a successful startup before, and the other is a first-time founder, that might make a very significant difference. And the second important consideration is how many co-founders there are. The more co-founders you have, the less likely an equal distribution is going to work. Why? Because if you have an equal distribution and a lot of co-founders, then many decisions are going to be very hard to make because everybody wants to have a word in how to make the decision. Even given those considerations, I have seen both equal and non-equal distributions work incredibly well, and I've also seen equal and non-equal distributions not work out. So there's no one size fits every startup when it comes to equity allocation. What is, however, key is that you are thoughtful about it, that you really think through, why are we choosing this allocation, and is it likely to work for our specific constellation of co-founders?